KillerKool-aid, Jonestown Massacre. On November 18, 1978, approximately 614 adults, young and old, killed themselves at the instruction of their manipulative, charismatic ruler, Jim Jones. Likewise, 304 children were murdered at the hands of their parents, friends, or relatives. 40 years later, survivors, loved ones, and sympathizers gathered to commemorate the deaths of 918 U.S. citizens in the horrific Jonestown Massacre. Today we delve into the real story of the People's Temple and how America endured the most civilian casualties in a single non-natural event up until the attacks on September 11. James Warren Jones was involved in the church from a young age. He was a part of the Oneness Pentecostal Church and became a student pastor at the age of 21. Within 4 years, Jones had already pastored 2 churches, his first one called Wings of Deliverance, and became an ordained minister under the Disciples of Christ. He changed his church's name to People's Temple, and it seemed like he was a virtuous man with good intent. Jones was married to Marceline Jones, whom he met at Reed Memorial Hospital when he was 16 and she was 20. They married 3 years later and soon had 9 kids, 8 adopted Asian and Black, and 1 biological son. However, based on the writings of Joe Carter in 9 Things You Should Know About Jim Jones, not even his wife believed the front he put on. According to John Whitefoot, Stephen Jones said his mother was a loving, gentle, and giving person. He reasoned that her failure lay in the fact that instead of leaving Jones, she insisted on trying to change him. She claimed that Jones only used the church as a way to exercise his Marxist views and get into the political world, and if true, he definitely succeeded. Jones had great connections with local California politicians, being featured and praised often in the magazine Herb Cain, Society section, and having Governor Jerry Brown, Harvey Milk, and George Moscone wanting to attend his services. They loved him because he had such a big influence over so many people. When Jones told his congregation something, they tended to believe him without question. When Jones warned his people that a nuclear war would occur specifically on July 15, 1967, they believed him and moved to California. His information, an Esquire article. He also told them that there is no point to living without him. They cheered. Still, Jones' church did begin as a triumph. The People's Temple was one of the only multiracial churches in a world of strictly segregated religious gatherings. There were performing groups for children, and people from all over came with the promise of a hate-free, racist-free, utopian community made mostly of hopeful African Americans. According to Katie Dowd, the People's Temple gave necessities and shelter to those in need, opened senior living homes, and found jobs for unemployed congregants, led drug rehabilitation programs, and gave scholarships to young ones in need. The People's Temple was a congregation that made you feel like you belonged, like you could make a difference, like things were going to get better in this pre-civil rights movement timeframe. Stephen Jones, Jim Jones' son, who was 18 at the time of the massacre and only survived because he was away at a basketball tournament, admitted that his father did teach him some valuable lessons. People always question how the People's Temple plummeted downhill so terrifyingly fast. Once the triumph of an interracial loving church, the true intentions of Jones began to reveal themselves to unravel into a horrific tragedy. For one, his biological son testifies that he became addicted to pharmaceutical drugs. In the docuseries Jonestown, Terror in the Jungle, Stephen Jones says, "I knew drugs were a problem with my father. In Jonestown, he would come on the loudspeaker and his speech was slurred. It was obvious to everyone that he was on something. But Dad was using drugs to wake up and using drugs to go to sleep and feel better about himself for a long time. Maybe these drugs are what caused Jones to believe he was God, that he was actually doing the right thing." In a heated conversation that Stephen once had with his mother, he said, "We're talking about a man who thinks he's God. You don't tell God you're not going out of the house, you're not taking any more drugs. You don't tell God he needs help. It won't work." Jones also had a very unusual sexual life and views. The rules he imposed on his congregation included straying from sexual or romantic relations of any type in the church. However, Jones rarely practiced what he preached, and he himself was doing the opposite. In the Gospel Coalition, one People's Temple member recalls, "And he would talk for hours about sex, about how good he was, and how women should think he was making love to them, not their husbands." It also states, along with many other sources, that Jones was arrested at La Hollywood Theater after an undercover LA police officer charged him with lewd conduct for trying to molest him. Knowing this, it's not surprising that allegations were being made about Jones and his leadership of the People's Temple, and as the years had gone by, Jones' congregation had grown immensely. He bought a small plot of land in the middle of a desert jungle in Guyana, South America, cleared it out, and moved there with some 1,000 congregants, including a little more than 300 children. Based on numerous sources, including Katie Dowd in the Houston Chronicle, Jones made his followers give up their passports on arrival to Guyana. This is really where things started to dive deeply downhill. Jonestown was an unbuilt settlement, which meant that one had to be built, and by the congregants. Stephen Jones reasoned in an interview that it started out nice. You worked in the morning, it was hard work, but when you were done you'd go to the compound to hear a sermon, and then you had your time. Not for long, however.
Work went from being a means of production to a means of control, and we worked less hours, but it was essentially digging ditches and filling them back up. He didn't want to spend any money. We ate terribly, and when you got done, when you were off work, your time was his time.
By the time work and a 3-hour sermon ended at 11 at night, all you wanted to do was drop dead in bed. But not yet. There were commonly held white nights. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Jones doubted his rainbow family's loyalty. Or maybe he had planned the suicide from a good year in advance. Either way, he would bring his congregants out in the middle of the night to drink supposedly poisoned drink. While his followers were unaware of whether it was deadly or not, Jones knew he hadn't poisoned it. At least not yet. It was the ultimate test of faith. Were the People's Temple members willing to kill themselves if he told them? It is speculated that some victims believed that November 18th was just another white night up until the last minute, the moment when they started throwing up blood and choking on their spit and they realized that this time was the last time. With these horrendous activities going on, it's no wonder the U.S. was getting calls from People's Temple members suggesting that they wanted to leave and weren't able to. Congressman Leo Ryan responded and organized a mission to head to Jonestown and investigate these allegations. He brought with him a camera crew, then Assistant Jackie Spear, other journalists, and concerned relatives of People's Temple congregants. After persistently insisting to be let in, Congressman Ryan made it into the compound. Most members were talking about Jonestown like it was the best thing that ever happened to them. However, in an interview with Today on her book Undaunted, Spear explains that something was wrong, that the plazas were a little too long and a little fanatic. Congressman Ryan received a note from a desperate member pleading for help. 4 days after landing, Leo, his team, and a few People's Temple members intent on leaving got ready to board helicopters back to the U.S. at a nearby airstrip. Suddenly, trucks pulled in with armed Jonestown military and began firing. The right side of my body was blown up. I had a bone coming out the side of my right arm, Spear explained as she spoke to Today interviewers. She was shot 5 times, point-blank range. Congressman Ryan and others were killed. Hence the airstrip ambush concluded in the end of the People's Temple climax. Jones convinced his congregation that the time had come to commit an act of revolutionary suicide. He told them that America was coming for them and they must not be defeated. In the death tape audio recording, a woman can be heard reassuring adults that the children are not crying from pain, but of fear. It turns out cyanide poisoning is a sickening way to die. When Stephen and Jones Jr., Jim Jones' sons, heard of what was happening, they immediately went to get help. But it was too late. When U.S. military arrived on the scene, they expected to be ambushed by Jonestown military. What they found instead was rows of swelling, rotting bodies, and under those bodies, children, and under those bodies, infants. The Jonestown massacre didn't end at that. The aftermath was destructive in its own way. The people back home who heard that their family members had been almost forced to kill themselves despaired. Some couldn't believe it. Many bodies were unidentifiable or unclaimed, and the journey to find a cemetery willing to take 300 unclaimed bodies was long and hard. The military personnel that placed 2 or 3 dead infants together in a bag and placed name tags on bloated, poisoned bodies for hours on end suffered PTSD. Others, terror-filled sleepless nights. To many, the Jonestown massacre was not a mass suicide. It was an act of irrefutable evil and horror, an act of mass murder. This past November of 2018 marks 40 years since the end of 918 innocent lives, and they will never be forgotten.
I'm going to tell you, Christine, without me, life has no meaning. I'm the best friend you'll ever have.